we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast for any reason, hit us up on our X or our Instagram at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. Check us out there for any reason. Follow along too. It's the best way to support the podcast. Follow along, subscribe, watch along, tell your friends, tell a bunch of your friends. And then, of course, you can always check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod if you want to support that way too. But thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to talk about today's topic, another book that I just finished reading recently. Reading. I mean, you can go back and listen to my audiobook podcast and see how I feel about that. But I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and when I talk about a book that I listen to, I said I read it. What's the fucking difference? Someone read it to me. How about that? Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your patience on today's episode too. It's a little late coming out, as you might be able to hear. I'm still coming off a little bit of a kind of a cold flu thing that was going around. It was pretty touch and go. Wasn't as bad as my last sickness where I had to play a show with the band after. That one was a lot worse. I felt like Michael Jordan in the flu game at that one, but wasn't feeling too hot yesterday. So moved the podcast to today, but here we are talking about it. Guns, Germs, and Steel. Really exciting, really interesting book. I'm excited to talk about it because I've referenced it a million times on this podcast alone, but I know it's on the Joe Rogan podcast list. I've heard Warren Buffett talk about this book. It's kind of one of those books that when it came out, it kind of really put a lot of research together and, you know, was a really good meta-analysis of a bunch of things, but then also just really shed some light on a few different questions that were kind of up in the air. No one really wrote it down, I guess. But anyway, the author was Jared Diamond, 1997. And he traveled the world. And one of the places that he came across was Papua New Guinea, and he was studying sociology, studying people, studying, you know, evolution of culture, things like that. And Papua New Guinea was fascinating to him, you know, because it's in an interesting place, kind of near South. It's in the middle of South Asia and Australia, which are very, very different cultures, very different peoples, cuisines, histories, different, so many different things. And Papua New Guinea has still managed to kind of be its own unique thing. It's an island that has mountains, it has ocean front, it has jungle, it has all these different topographies and different kind of people who live in this small island. And when he was traveling, he traveled with one of the locals named Yali, and they were kind of, you know, when they were getting to know each other a little bit more, Yali asked Jared, he said, "Why is it that you white people developed so much cargo and brought it to New Guinea, but we black people had so little of our own?" Essentially, why did the rate of progress differ so much for cultures on different continents? And that's kind of what this whole book is about. So why is it that Europeans and Asian cultures are so advanced versus some African cultures? Or, you know, you can look at North America, but it you know, its history is only a few hundred years old. If you look at modern, like, you know, Europeans, when like, you know, my ancestors and stuff came over within generations. So, but up until that point, Indigenous Americans were running the show over in North America. And, you know, why did Europeans, like, why were they able to just come over here and just take over everything? And again, Guns, Germs, and Steel kind of like explains a lot of it, in the sense of guns, in the sense of technology, germs in the sense of literal germs, how they spread and how they can affect different populations, and steel in the sense of what actually is in your environment, what can you like kind of pull out of the ground. That also actually includes agriculture. So about 11,000 years ago, all human civilizations on this planet were hunter-gatherers. Maybe Jared Diamond didn't know about the work of Randall Carlson and the other dude. Oh my god, I can't remember his name. Russell Carlson. No. Anyway, oh my god, I can't remember. Hold on, I gotta look this up now, folks. So the reason I say that, so 11,000 years ago, we were all hunter-gatherers, you know. That was at the end of the last ice age, and that's kind of, again, what, especially this book was written in 1997, that's kind of what mainstream science is going to tell us, is that that's kind of the oldest kind of civilizations, or not the oldest, like, you know, humans are about, I think, generally speaking, they're saying like 100,000 years old. And they think that we are just like hunter-gatherers for quite some time, up until about 11,000 years ago is when we started to develop agriculture. But Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock is the other guy that I was thinking of. Those two guys actually think that there's evidence that the Earth is, or human beings have been on Earth much longer, that there was some cataclysm that wiped us all out and knocked us back to hunter-gatherers. So anyway, regardless of what the general idea was, and I mean, even if it did knock us back to the Stone Age, it knocked us back to hunter-gatherers. So 11,000 years ago, we were all hunter-gatherers, and eventually we started developing agriculture and developing different things, and this was completely based on environment. There's no evidence that the primary cause of different outcomes across the continents is genetic. You know, people kind of thought like, oh, fucking white people are smarter and fucking Asian people are smarter and black people, whatever. Like, it's bullshit. It's just was environment. It was just wherever people were is what started agriculture, because each one of those places, or, you know, on Earth supported different foliage, right? Like different plants and different species, right? And some plants are better for domestication than others, right? And, you know, if you lived in the fucking tundra, there's not a lot of plants up there. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to grow fields and fields of shit. And then if you live in the desert, same fucking idea. But if you live in the beautiful, you know, Cheech area, you know, lush fucking Holland Marsh area, you're growing shit. You're growing shit easy. Now, I mentioned Papua New Guinea and Australia before, but the whole idea around that and the reason why that is fascinating is because the occupation of Australia and the surrounding Polynesian islands was an amazing feat, because it showed that humans could, like, it was this huge, long grasp, this reach out that humans were willing to do, in the sense that, you know, we have this innate drive of continuing to push these boundaries, continuing to find things. I mean, essentially, those people that went down that way, and what Jared Diamond is bringing that up, people that went down that way ended up finding an area that unfortunately didn't have a lot of support for agriculture, but then that's what forced them to continuously push further and find the other Polynesian islands, right? They kept going on the boats. They said, all right, listen, the middle of this giant continent isn't too fucking good. It's the outback. It's like not much is going on, but the coast areas are awesome. But let's keep going with what works. Let's keep going with these boats. Let's get in and let's keep moving forward and try and find these other islands. And then that's what helped them find different foliage and fauna and rocks and different things on the island that they needed to push forward. They had to do with, you know, they had to work with what they had. Food and animal domestication arose independently in 5 different areas at widely different times all around the world. You know, from the Fertile Crescent from 11,000 years ago all the way to Central America and Eastern North America 5 to 3,000 years ago. There was always blending of hunter-gathering and agriculture. It wasn't always just agriculture. But but the thing with agriculture is that it did not lead to an unequivocally better lifestyle. In fact, for those who actually grow, life tends to be worse than it would be as a hunter-gatherer. So if you are farming, it's actually harder than hunter-gathering. If this is true, and the evidence seems to point that way, then it means that advancement of civilization has essentially happened on the backs of society's have-nots. In other words, the entire system we live in, agriculture, capitalism, etc., requires inequality to function. So, it was kind of the people who were shunned away, people who couldn't hunt, who started doing this agriculture probably because they said, look what we can do. And it requires so much work, it requires so much, but it's really interesting that's one of the thoughts there. And at the end of the day, agriculture can support a larger population. And that's why they inevitably overtook hunter-gatherers. So yeah, maybe hunter-gatherer is actually the superior method. But because agriculture can support and has to, the only way you can actually do agriculture is having a large population, that's actually how agriculture became the dominant way that we produced food. And essentially one of the reasons why, places with agriculture took over the other places. Certain areas have plants better suited to domestication, like I mentioned. And because of that, and because of some of these areas that had those better plants for domestication, they also had a head start on places that had harder to grow, harder to domesticate plants, because they had already gained that knowledge from domesticating their own plants. They were able to use that same knowledge and apply it to other plants most of the time, and then domesticate that on top of it. So it was like, even if you were like moving into an area where hunter-gatherers hadn't domesticated any plants because they didn't know how, you already had this knowledge as already in agriculture. You're moving in there and you're saying, boom, I'm taking this, and then you're wiping, or when I say wiping out a culture, it doesn't necessarily mean they were killing everybody. They were just assimilating that culture most likely into their own. As I'll mention as I mentioned later, yeah, war has a lot to do with that. Guns is the first word in the fucking title of this book. But again, a lot of times you're also just absorbing that and teaching these people this new way back in the early times anyway. And again, I have to reiterate, and I think Jared Diamond does a good job of doing this. The rise of agriculture in some areas before others has to do with environment, not the intelligence of the people. It's the Anna Karenina principle in many areas of life. So the Anna Karenina principle is, in many areas of life, success is not about doing one thing correctly, but about avoiding many possible modes of failure. So a lot of times you just are maybe unwittingly avoiding all these different ways that it can go wrong, and you're just finding the way to do it. Domestication of large mammals ended about 4,500 years ago. So basically that's saying, like, we figured out which animals are good to domesticate. Those are the animals. We've tried them all. We've tried to domesticate all the animals, basically. And horses and cows and sheep and fucking chickens and pigs, goats. Those are the good ones. And we're sticking to them. Dogs, I guess, technically are ones that we domesticated, but obviously not for food. We're talking about food here. Another big reason that Europe and Asia dominated the world was the primary axis of North America and South America and Africa is north to south, right? If you think about it on the map, it's longitudinal, not latitudinal. So it's oriented that way. But for Europe and Asia, it's east to west, and locations along the same east-west axis share similar latitudes and thus similar day lengths, seasons, climate, rainfall, biomes, all of which increase the speed of innovation. And they're all fucking connected. It's like quite a large landmass. Yeah, you know, there's a couple deserts in the way and a few mountain ranges here and there, but more or less you can kind of travel from Asia. I mean, there was the Silk Road and all that stuff, but you can travel along the east to west axis pretty far in Europe to Asia. Farming communities. So the germ part of things anyway. Farming communities actually developed immunity to crowd diseases. So those are the ones that kind of wiped out hunter-gatherers. So when you have large communities, you start to get disease like measles and chickenpox and shit. Now look at chickenpox. When kids get them, some parents nowadays are starting to have chickenpox parties where they go, hey, you know, little Jimmy has chickenpox. Let's have everyone over and we'll give everyone chickenpox and then they'll gain immunity. And that only comes from having a bunch of people. If you didn't have a bunch of people and all of a sudden you had chickenpox, and then you came into contact with some other tribe that doesn't have chickenpox, you're going to spread that to that whole people, and you might kill all those people because they might react to all this. They have no immunity whatsoever. That was the biggest reason why farming communities actually developed these types of germs, so that when they did show up to hunter-gatherer communities, they just spread that like wildfire and they all went out. As far as inventions and technology is concerned, you know, guns and all that stuff and all the different plows and all these different things throughout time that, you know, these huge major inventions, the wheel that pushed us, you know, through history, most of those inventions were not a result of necessity, but the result of either tinkers or curiosity. You know, people just trying different things, thinking like, hey, there could be a better way. So there's always been these people, which is amazing. And if you're one of these people, God bless you, and don't keep that under a bushel basket. If you have an invention, show it to the world, because you never know. Government and religion are also two of the main reasons why some societies overcame others. I mean, religion, a lot of these wars were based on religious ideals. Hey, that, you know, they have a different god than us, so we're going to go overtake them. It's basically just like coming up with reasons to overtake other people, and government can do that as well. Because war, or the threat of war, is the primary factor in amalgamation of human societies throughout history. You know, Giannis Pappas, the comedian, always says, you know, don't, or not always says, but I've heard him say once on a podcast, he said, you know, whatever your culture is, it was probably, you know, it was essentially, you know, forced into you by the culture that overtook yours. You know, he probably used some other choice languages there, which I don't want to quote him, but essentially overcoming nations, like I mentioned before, are going to try to assimilate these cultures that they take over, and they're going to try to make them follow their rules and follow their ways and traditions. So then all of a sudden, a couple generations later, you just think, hey, that's just my culture. But that was forced into them, and that was forced into them by another invading nation and another invading culture, until like maybe we can trace back like the very first type of culture. But even then, there would have been a faction from that, and then that's okay. Like, not saying necessarily that's bad. And yes, maybe we shouldn't have wars and stuff where people are killed. But there is something really special about understanding other people's cultures, because if we are this global nation, if we are this global world now that exists, we should be able to understand each other's traditions, understand each other's cultures even more so, and understand that we shouldn't be fucking killing each other over them, but maybe we should understand that there are different ones, and then we can enjoy them. I mean, I just watched that documentary, Shukalski, and he about struggle about the artwork of Stanislaw Shukalski, and he talks about, you know, being a citizen of the world, where the more nations and cultures that you can identify with, the larger your heart is and the more capable you are for love, right? So, again, but unfortunately, the cultures that we and our traditions that we have were forced into our families, our ancestors' lives, right? So, war, unfortunately, is what kind of has driven history throughout all this time, right? And like I said, these farming agricultural nations that started that way just have bigger populations, and most of the time throughout history, a bigger population is how you're gonna win a war. It's just kind of through brute strength. And on that same idea, isolation is a key factor in preventing creativity and innovation from spreading. So it was important for other nations to trade with others and talk to others, and for the Greeks to travel to Egypt and do all that, and then Marco Polo doing his thing, people going all over the world and learning new things and bringing them back. That's what actually propelled these nations forward. And the nations that just close themselves off and look at, there's still fucking tribes that are hunter-gatherers, because if you try to come and talk to them, they spear you because they're just like, we're not even down. We're sticking with what we got. So all that being said, there are really 4 primary reasons why Europeans rose to power. There are 4 primary reasons why Europeans rose to power and conquered the natives of North America and South America. To wrap it all up. 1, the continental difference in plants and animals available for domestication, like we mentioned. Different places have different animals, different fauna, flora. That led to larger armies in Europe and Asia. Number 2, the rate of diffusion of technological innovation due to the orientation of the continents, east to west versus north to south, and geographic barriers, mountains, deserts, etc. So that technology really transfused across, it really moved across east from Asia to Europe and back and forth over all those years, so much easier than it could go up and down in Africa or North America and South America. And of course, there wasn't people in North America and South America for a little bit too. They had a slower start to come over that land bridge and what have you. Of course, the intercontinental spread of ideas was much different, kind of along that same idea. That's the third idea, is that because Asia Minor, all that stuff, and Europe are so connected and so close to Africa, is that even when Africa was doing their thing too, they could still kind of like interconnect their own ideas there. And then the fourth idea is that Europe and Asia had larger populations, with more of a constant spread and idea. So like, because the area was so much bigger in Europe and Asia, there was so much more of a kind of a race and a spread across the country. So there was way more competition, and that really pushed these technological ideas. And again, it's a really interesting book. It's kind of like, it's tough to decode. It's a good book to listen to, just because I think you might be a little dry just reading some of that stuff. But I think Jared Diamond does a really good job of kind of putting everything together and just making sure that these ideas are kind of cohesive, and it has a really good kind of wrap up, and it really makes sense at the end there. And again, you don't really have to ask yourself kind of why is it kind of set up like that anymore, right? And it's always interesting with any of these historical ideas, these historical books, these historical ventures, if you will, these experiments, these investigations. I think it's important that we have them, because understanding the causes of history improves our ability to intervene and improve the world. Many people mistakenly assume that discussing history is just a way to explain away tough issues. Not at all. It improves our ability to take effective action. So that's the thing, we can always say, if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. But that was a great quote there. That was an idea taken from the book, and again, just kind of one of those books that knowing this information, yeah, you can kind of like maybe listen to a podcast like this, read a synopsis of the book and kind of get the gist. But it is one of those books you kind of have to read, and it does kind of put this whole little bow on like, okay, success and all these things, none of it is attached to divine intervention, genetics, any of this stuff. It is pure fucking chance. It is a flip of the coin. It just so happens that you were born in your own fucking thing. Maybe that's another, talk about Giannis Papas. I'll talk about Chrissy D too, to even the playing field. Geography is destiny. That's what Chrissy D always says. And hey, that's the thing. Some of these people were just born in areas that the plants fucking grew nice, and they had cows and goats instead of fucking giraffe and zebra that were piecing everywhere, going like, hello, how are we going to domesticate these motherfuckers? They just pieced out the plane. Gotta go chase them down. I'm gonna eat them. Fuck them. I'm not down to fucking domesticate this shit. I'm gonna just munch it. Anyway, no one's better than anybody else. We're all equal. Let's get back to square. Let's fucking hang out. Let's all just get along. Thank y'all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Guns, Germs, and Steel. Jared Diamond. Go check it out. Read it. Listen to it. It's on Spotify. It'll probably take you a couple months to listen to it because Spotify is still on the fucking whackness and not letting us just listen to as much audiobook as we can. Who cares? They don't have listening time for music. Why would they have listening time for audiobooks? Anyway, I'm never going to let it go until they do. So, thanks all for listening again. Shout out Jared Diamond. Guns, Germs, and Steel. Talk to you soon. Peace.